Sometimes life throws you curveballs that change everything. When I inherited my father's rundown farmhouse, everyone called it worthless swampland. My neighbors mocked me. My fiancée left me, and I was ready to give up on my American dream. When I saw my father's will, my heart stopped cold. This wasn't just some piece of paper. This was a death sentence to my perfect city life, and I knew right then that everything was about to change. I was an engineer, sure. Career was supposedly going up. But the more floors I added to other people's skyscrapers, the more I felt like the foundation of my own life was cracking. Let me back up a second. Name's Jake. I'm 34, and up until 6 months ago, I thought I had it all figured out. I was living the American dream in a rented apartment downtown with my fiancée, Sarah. We had plans, big plans. Our own place in the city center, rooftop parties, the whole 9 yards. I was that typical city guy who thought the word farm only existed on Instagram posts with those fake sunset filters. My job as a structural engineer was, it was paying the bills. I spent my days calculating load-bearing walls and stress points for buildings that touched the clouds. But lately, I've been feeling like I was designing my own prison. The corporate grind was eating me alive, and I'd just gotten laid off due to restructuring. Translation: they found someone younger and cheaper. Sarah and I were planning our wedding, looking at venues that cost more than most people's cars. We had this vision of success mapped out, like one of my blueprints. Everything was supposed to be perfect, predictable, and profitable. Then my phone rang. My father was dead. Heart attack. Just like that. I hadn't talked to the old man in months. We'd had this ongoing argument about life choices. He always said I was building castles in the air instead of planting roots in the ground. He lived out in this tiny town called Millbrook. Population, maybe 3,000 on a good day. The kind of place where everybody knows everybody, and the biggest excitement is when the Dairy Queen gets a new flavor. The funeral was exactly what you'd expect in small-town America. Folding chairs, casseroles, and people telling me stories about my dad that I'd never heard. Apparently, he spent his last years talking about this grand plan he had for the land. Something about sustainable farming and getting back to basics. I nodded politely, but honestly, I was just counting the hours until I could get back to civilization. Then came the will reading. The lawyer, this old guy who probably handled every legal matter in town since the Civil War, cleared his throat and started reading. Most of it was standard stuff until he got to the big reveal. My father had left me everything. And by everything, I mean a ramshackle house on 47 acres of what looked like the kind of land God forgot to finish. The house was a disaster. Picture this, a 100-year-old farmhouse that looked like it had been through a hurricane and earthquake combo. The roof sagged like an old man's back. The paint was cracked and faded like old leather, and the front porch had more holes than Swiss cheese. This place made haunted houses look like luxury condos. But it was mine. My dad had always said, "Jake, real land under your feet gives you more than just crops. It gives you roots." I used to laugh at that. Now his roots turned out to be my only inheritance, an old, creaking house that looked like it had taken a direct meteor hit. Standing there, looking at this monument to decay, I felt something weird. It wasn't quite nostalgia, wasn't quite dread. It was like staring at a puzzle I didn't know how to solve. That's when I met the Smiths. Picture the perfect American farming family straight out of a magazine. Their land bordered mine, and sweet Jesus, it was like looking at the before and after photos of development. Perfectly manicured fields, shiny equipment, a house that belonged in better homes and gardens. They were success with a capital S, and they knew it. Mr. Smith, call him Bill, was one of those guys who probably pressed his jeans and shined his work boots. His wife looked like she stepped out of a church cookbook, all smiles and passive-aggressive politeness. They had that particular brand of Midwestern charm that felt warm until you realized they were sizing you up like a bank teller counting zeros. Their first words to me? "Oh, you must be poor Jake. Such a shame about your father. And this place." The way Bill looked at my acreage, you'd think I was harboring a toxic waste dump. His eyes kept scanning my boundaries like a general planning an invasion. He mentioned something about having big plans and how these little patches should become one unified operation. Then he looked me dead in the eye and said, You wouldn't want to stand in the way of progress, would you, Jake? I didn't think much of it then, but their ambitions were bigger than their fields. The real gut punch came when I called Sarah. You know that moment when you realize you and someone you love are speaking completely different languages? That was our conversation. I tried to explain about the inheritance, about maybe fixing the place up, about exploring options. Sarah's response was immediate and brutal, and she wasn't just shocked. She was looking at me like I'd announced I was joining a cult. Sell it. Right now. What the hell are we going to do out there? It's a dump, Jake. A complete waste of space. We could sell it and finally get that condo downtown. This is our chance. Sarah didn't say the word ultimatum, but it felt like one. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I was planning to marry, suddenly became a stranger. She saw dollar signs where I was starting to see something else, something I couldn't quite name yet. Her words hit me like ice water on whatever warm feelings I'd started having about my dad's memory. Here I was, standing in the ruins of my father's dreams, and the woman I loved was treating it like found money, like his whole life was just a happy accident that would fund our Instagram-worthy lifestyle. That night, I walked around the parcel alone. 47 acres of overgrown fields, broken fences, and wild possibilities. The silence was deafening after years of city noise. No sirens, no traffic, no neighbors arguing through thin walls. Just me, the crickets, and this overwhelming sense that I was standing at a crossroads. The old man had left me more than real estate. He'd left me a choice. I could sell this place, take the money, buy that condo, marry Sarah, and go back to designing other people's dreams. Safe, predictable, profitable. Or I could stay and figure out what the hell my father saw in this mess. As I stood there under more stars than I'd seen in years, I remembered something he used to say, "Son, sometimes the most valuable thing you can own is something nobody else wants." I used to think he was just making excuses for being poor. Now I was starting to wonder if maybe he knew something I didn't. The Smith's house was lit up like a Christmas display across the way. Perfect. Successful. Everything I thought I wanted. My place was dark, broken, and full of possibilities I couldn't even imagine yet. That's when I realized my father hadn't just left me land. He'd left me a challenge. This was my personal Grand Canyon, splitting my life into before and after. I was standing on the edge of a cliff, not knowing whether I'd jump or fly. Sarah's words were still ringing in my ears. The Smith's barely concealed contempt was fresh in my memory. Everything logical told me to take the money and run. But something deeper, something that felt like my dad's voice, was whispering a different story. I didn't know it then, but I was about to learn that my new world wouldn't just be challenging. It would be hostile, and my friendly neighbors had their own unpleasant plans that would force me to grow from a city boy into a real fighter. The war for my soul was about to begin, and I had no idea what I was getting into. So there I was, standing at the edge of what felt like my own personal war zone. The Smiths had made their intentions clear. Sarah was breathing down my neck, and I had a choice to make. Fight or flight. Stay or sell. I chose to fight. Let me tell you something about desperation. It's like rocket fuel for stubbornness. I threw myself into fixing that place like a man possessed. Every waking hour was spent pulling weeds, hammering nails, and trying to resurrect something that looked like it belonged in a zombie apocalypse movie. I clung to that land like a starving cat with its last sardine. Every torn weed, every nail I hammered into the old fence was my personal middle finger to despair. My hands were covered in calluses, my clothes permanently stained with dirt, and my bank account was bleeding red faster than a fresh wound. But you know what? It felt good. Real good. For the first time in years, I wasn't calculating stress loads for someone else's dreams. I was building my own, even if it looked like a disaster to everyone else. There's something primal about working with your hands, about feeling actual dirt under your fingernails instead of keyboard grease. Sarah, meanwhile, was having none of it. Her phone calls became daily interrogations. She'd drive out from the city every weekend, step out of her pristine Honda Civic, and look around like she'd landed on Mars. The woman who used to love my ambition now treated my work ethic like a mental illness. She saw nothing but weeds and water damage. I saw roots trying to grow back. Her words cut deeper than any tool in my shed. You're choosing this dump over me. You could be successful, but now you look like some homeless guy. She didn't understand that I wasn't choosing the land over her. I was choosing myself and my dad's memory. Every conversation felt like standing in a hailstorm of sharp little rocks. Sarah had this way of making my biggest dreams sound like my biggest failures. But the Smiths? They took passive aggression to an art form. It started small. Mrs. Smith would drive by in her gleaming SUV, slow down just enough to roll down her window, and deliver her daily dose of neighborly poison. Oh, look, the millionaire engineer turned farmer. Hope that barn doesn't fall on your head like your dreams did. Her laugh was like nails on a chalkboard, but with malice. Then the accidents started happening. One morning I woke up to a smell that could knock a buzzard off a garbage truck. Right next to my fence line, like a gift from the devil himself, was a massive pile of manure. Fresh, steaming, strategically placed. Mr. Smith appeared within minutes, wearing that plastic smile that never reached his eyes. Oh, gosh, Jake. So sorry about that. Wind must have blown it the wrong way when we were fertilizing. The wind, apparently, had very specific targeting skills. This was war, and they were playing dirty, literally. But that was just the warm-up act. My dad's old tractor, this beat-up Massey Ferguson that had been running since disco was popular, suddenly developed mysterious illnesses. Dead battery one day, flat tire the next. It was like someone was leaving nails on my driveway. But hey, accidents happen, right? The Smiths had perfected the art of plausible deniability. Every sabotage came with an innocent explanation and a concerned frown. They were like criminal masterminds disguised as Midwestern farm folk. Then came the water incident. I'd spent weeks nurturing these little tomato seedlings like they were my own children. Every morning I'd check on them, water them, talk to them. Yeah, I talked to plants. Sue me, they were the only things on that property that didn't judge me. One morning I walked out to find them floating in a muddy soup. My entire garden had been turned into a swamp overnight. Somehow, mysteriously, a water line had developed a leak, right at the property line. What are the odds? I stood there staring at the destruction, and I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was pure, concentrated rage. The kind that burns clean and hot, and doesn't go out easy. Their mockery cut like a blade, but their sabotage felt like a knife in the back. I felt trampled, like those peas rotting in my garden, but somewhere deep down, something caught fire, something that whispered, "You'll show them yet." Sarah chose that exact moment to deliver her ultimatum. She showed up unannounced on a Saturday morning, marched through my muddy disaster zone in her designer boots, and laid it on the line. Her face was set like concrete, and her voice had that edge that meant business. "It's me or the swamp, Jake. Choose. Right now." The ultimatum hit harder than the concrete slabs I used to design. She stood there in her perfect outfit, perfectly made up, representing everything clean and successful and normal that I was supposed to want. Behind her was the mess I'd been building, the dream I'd been chasing, the promise I'd made to a dead man's memory. "I mean it, Jake. Sell this place, come back to the city, and we can pretend this whole phase never happened, or lose me forever." I looked at her, really looked at her, and suddenly understood that we'd been living in completely different universes. She saw failure where I saw potential. She saw embarrassment where I saw purpose. She wanted the old Jake back, but that guy was gone. He died somewhere between the funeral and the first nail I'd hammered into that fence. I chose my father's memory and that patch of stubborn earth. She left, just like that. Took her car, her judgment, and the last pieces of my city life with her. I watched her Honda disappear down that dusty road and felt like I was watching my old self drive away forever. That night, sitting alone in that creaking house, the silence was deafening. Every groan of the old floorboards reminded me how empty the place felt. Outside, crickets were having their nightly concert, but inside it was just me and the weight of everything I'd lost. No Sarah. No career. No respect from the neighbors. Just me, 47 acres of problems, and a bank account that was evaporating faster than morning dew. The Smiths must have sensed blood in the water because their harassment kicked into overdrive. More accidental manure dumps. More mysterious equipment failures. More sideways glances and muttered jokes about amateurs with muddy boots. Every morning became a new discovery of what had gone wrong overnight. It was psychological warfare, small-town style. I started sleeping lighter, jumping at every sound. Was that the wind or someone messing with my truck? Was that rain or another accidental water leak? Paranoia became my roommate, and trust became a luxury I couldn't afford. But here's the thing about hitting rock bottom. It gives you a solid foundation to build on. One evening, as I sat on that sagging porch watching the sun set over the Smiths' perfect fields, something clicked. Maybe I was done being everyone's victim. Maybe it was time to stop reacting and start acting. Maybe this broken-down inheritance had more secrets than anyone realized. I thought about my dad's last words to me, the ones I dismiss as old man rambling. Jake, sometimes the most valuable thing you inherit isn't what you can see. It's what you're willing to dig for. That's when I decided to really explore what he'd left me. Not just the obvious stuff, the house, the land, the debt, but the hidden things, the forgotten corners, the places where an old farmer might have stashed his real treasures. The barn was calling to me, that old, half-collapsed monument to agricultural history that I've been avoiding because it looked like it might fall down if I sneezed too hard. Time to do some digging. In my broken soul, there was still a tiny spark of hope flickering. And who knew that this spark would ignite from long-forgotten secrets waiting for me in that old barn? I had no idea that the most unexpected discovery was waiting for me in the place I least expected to find it. Time to dig. That's all I kept thinking as I stared at that old barn the morning after Sarah left. The structure looked like it had survived more disasters than a FEMA poster child, but it was calling me like some kind of agricultural siren song. Grief is a weird thing. It can crush you flat or make you dig deeper. I chose to dig deeper. I threw myself into work like a man diving off a burning ship. My engineer brain was screaming for projects, for problems to solve, for anything that would distract me from the fact that my life had become a country song without the catchy chorus. That barn had been haunting me since day one. Every time I looked at it, I could almost hear my dad's voice saying something about not judging a book by its cover. Easy for him to say. He wasn't staring at a cover that looked like it had been through a paper shredder. The inside was even worse than I'd imagined. Cobwebs hung like party streamers from hell, and the smell hit me like a physical wall. It was odor to decomposed everything. Old hay, rusted metal, and what I'm pretty sure was a family of possums who'd been dead since the Carter years. But you know what they say about dire situations and creative solutions. I started with the obvious stuff. Broken tools that looked like medieval torture devices. Empty feed sacks that crumble when I touched them. A collection of glass jars that contained. Well, let's just say I didn't investigate too closely. Then I found the chest. It was tucked away in the corner like a guilty secret, covered by a tarp that had seen better decades. The wood was solid oak, the kind they don't make anymore, because trees apparently don't grow that patient these days. Heavy as a small car and locked tighter than Fort Knox. The lock was old but sturdy. Thankfully, my engineering background included a brief, unofficial education in creative problem solving. Translation, I knew how to break things in useful ways. Inside was my dad's life in paper form. Old receipts, faded photographs, and at the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth like buried treasure, was a stack of yellow documents. Maps, technical drawings, and what looked like official permits dating back to my grandfather's time. I barely glanced at them. Honestly, I figured they were just more evidence of my family's long tradition of failed farming ventures. Maybe blueprints for chicken coops or irrigation systems that never worked. I stuffed them back and kept digging. That's when the Smiths decided to twist the knife. I was outside, taking a break from the dust and decay, when Mr. Smith appeared like a bad rash. He had that same condescending smile, but this time it was weaponized. His wife was right behind him, arms crossed like a disapproving school principal. "Jake," he said, spreading his arms like he was bestowing a blessing, "we've been talking, and we want to help you out of this situation." The way he said situation made it sound like I had a terminal disease instead of property deed. "See, son, this swampland you inherited, well, it's just not viable for someone with your background. You're a numbers guy, Jake. This land needs calluses, not calculators." His smile got wider and more plastic. "We're prepared to make you an offer. Fair market value for what this land is actually worth." Then came the number. It was insultingly low. Scrap metal prices, just like he joked about before. "Think of it as a mercy purchase," Mrs. Smith chimed in with her church social sweetness. "You can take that money, go back to the city where you belong, and forget this whole unfortunate chapter ever happened." I stood there feeling like I'd been slapped with a wet fish. These people weren't just trying to buy my land. They were trying to buy my surrender, my dignity, my father's memory. That's when something primal woke up inside me. Call it pride, call it stubbornness, call it the ghost of every ancestor who'd ever been told they weren't good enough. Their contempt cut me to the bone, but it also lit a fire that burned away every doubt I'd been carrying. "Thanks for the offer," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "But I'll pass." The look on their faces was worth every sleepless night I'd had since arriving. After they left, I sat on my porch and stewed. Their words kept echoing in my head. Worthless swampland, numbers guy out of his depth, mercy purchase. Every insult felt like a challenge, and I've never been good at backing down from challenges. That's when I remembered those old papers in the barn. My dad used to say, "Sometimes the real gold isn't where you're looking, it's where you're building." I'd always thought he was just being philosophical. But what if he meant it literally? What if there was something about this land that I didn't know? Something that would prove its value beyond what any Smith could imagine? I retrieved those documents with the reverence of an archaeologist, spread them out on my kitchen table under the one good light bulb in the house. Most of it was exactly what I'd expected: boring farm stuff, old property surveys, receipts for equipment that had rusted away decades ago. But there were other things too. Official-looking permits with government seals. Survey maps that showed my property in relation to something bigger. I couldn't make heads or tails of it, but my engineer brain was picking up patterns. Lines that didn't quite make sense. Measurements that seemed oddly specific for a simple farm. The local archive was my last hope. If these papers meant anything, someone there might know what they were looking at. It felt like grasping at straws, but straws were all I had left. The librarian, a sweet old lady who probably remembered when the town was founded, took one look at my documents and whistled softly. "Well, haven't seen papers like these in years. Let me get Margaret. She knows more about the old survey records than anyone." Margaret turned out to be a retired county clerk with eyes like a hawk and a memory like a steel trap. She studied my papers for what felt like hours, occasionally making little humming sounds that could have meant anything. "Interesting," she finally said. "Your grandfather was quite the forward-thinking man. These aren't just farm documents. They're planning permits, infrastructure surveys. Looks like he was preparing for something big." Something big. The word sent a chill down my spine. What kind of something big? I asked, trying to keep the urgency out of my voice. Margaret smiled like she was holding on to a secret. "Well, that's hard to say without doing more research. But I can tell you this much. Your property sits on some very interesting geological features, the kind that certain entities might find valuable for certain types of development." She couldn't give me specifics without more investigation, but she promised to look into it, said it might take a few weeks. I left the archive feeling like I was walking on air and quicksand at the same time. Hope and terror make strange bedfellows, and they were having a wrestling match in my chest. 2 weeks later, I got a letter that changed everything. It was official looking with a county seal and everything. An invitation to a public hearing about a major regional development project. The kind of bureaucratic language that usually puts people to sleep faster than a sedative. I almost threw it away. Public hearings in small towns are usually about as exciting as watching paint dry in slow motion. Probably some discussion about widening a road or updating the water treatment plant. But something nagged at me. Maybe it was my engineering background. Maybe it was paranoia. But I'd learned that sometimes the most boring-sounding meetings are where the most important decisions get made. The kind of decisions that happen when nobody's paying attention. So I decided to go, what's the worst that could happen? I'd waste an evening listening to bureaucrats drone on about municipal planning. The meeting was in the old community center, the kind of building that had probably hosted everything from wedding receptions to church suppers since before I was born. Folding chairs arranged in neat rows, fluorescent lights humming overhead, and that distinctive smell of old carpet and industrial coffee. I grabbed a seat in the back, planning to half listen while I worked on my phone. Just another civic duty to check off the list. The officials filed in like pallbearers in cheap suits. Mayor, county commissioner, some guy in an expensive suit who definitely wasn't from around here. They had that particular energy of people who were about to change everything and weren't sure how the crowd would react. Then they started talking about the project. At first, it sounded like typical government speak. Regional development initiative, economic opportunity, infrastructure, modernization. The kind of buzzwords that politicians use when they want to sound important without saying anything specific. But then they brought out the big screen. I thought I was wasting my time. Turns out, I was walking straight into something that would flip my whole world on its head. What I saw on that screen stopped my heart cold and turned my entire world upside down like an earthquake. The map that appeared on that screen was beautiful, colorful, detailed, with crisp lines showing future roads, warehouses, and railroad tracks. A massive logistics hub designed to connect two states and become the transportation heart of the entire region. My engineer soul instantly recognized the scale. This was huge, enormous, the kind of project that reshapes entire economies. And then my eyes caught something familiar. When I saw the diagram and spotted my property on it, my knees nearly buckled, because I instantly understood this changes everything, and then some. This wasn't just my old farmhouse. This was the absolute center of the future hub, the main node without which this $25 million project simply couldn't exist. I realized in that moment, this changes everything, and then some. This was my lottery ticket, a jackpot when I never knew I'd bought. And oh my God, those old maps from Dad. They weren't about chickens. They were about strategy. My engineering experience let me grasp the magnitude instantly. Location is everything in logistics, and my 47 acres sat right at the convergence point where 3 major highways would meet the new rail line. It was like discovering you'd been sitting on oil while everyone thought you had worthless dirt. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a rusty shovel. I shifted my gaze to scan the room and found the Smiths. Mr. Smith, who just weeks ago had offered me scrap metal prices for my worthless swampland, was white as a sheet. Mrs. Smith had her hand clutched to her chest like she was having a heart attack. Their eyes were wide with shock, their confident smirks transformed into masks of pure horror. This was revenge served cold, but so sweet I wanted to savor every single second. They'd spent months trying to humiliate me, sabotage my equipment, and force me off my land. Now they were watching their victim become their biggest nightmare. The city boy they dismissed was about to become richer than their entire family's net worth combined. The presenter continued with technical details, but I was floating somewhere between euphoria and disbelief. Then came the numbers that made my heart stop completely. Land acquisition costs for this project are estimated at approximately $25 million. $25 million. I could barely breathe. My heart felt like it was about to burst out of my chest and start doing the salsa. $25 million. For my swamp. For the land the Smiths had called worthless. For the property Sarah had begged me to sell. I sat there pinned to my chair, unable to believe my own eyes. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode, and my head was spinning from the mind-blowing reality. This was the moment when you realize the life you knew no longer exists. And it was beautiful. The room was buzzing with questions and discussions, but I was in my own bubble of shock and triumph. People were talking about environmental impact studies, construction timelines, job creation. All I could think about was my dad. He'd known. Somehow, that crazy old farmer had known this day would come. Those documents in the barn weren't random farm paperwork. They were insurance policies, preparation, a father's final gift to a son who'd lost his way. My grandfather must have been in on it too. Those old survey maps, the infrastructure permits, the careful documentation of every geological feature on the property. This wasn't just farming. This was generational planning. As the meeting continued, I watched the Smiths trying to maintain some semblance of dignity. They kept glancing at me with expressions that mixed fear, rage, and desperate calculation. I could practically see the wheels turning in their heads. How do we get a piece of this action? But it was too late for them. Way too late. When the presentation ended, people started filing out with a kind of excited chatter that follows life-changing announcements. I sat there for a few extra minutes, letting the reality sink in. The community center that had seemed so boring an hour ago now felt like the site of my personal resurrection. I wasn't just going to be rich. I was going to be the key player in the biggest development project this region had ever seen. Over the next few weeks, the negotiations began. And let me tell you, this is where my engineering background became my superpower. The developers team quickly realized they weren't dealing with some ignorant farmer they could lowball into submission. The negotiations felt like a chess match where I'd suddenly become a grandmaster. I didn't just confirm my property rights. As an engineer, I was able to point out specific technical advantages of my land that made it even more valuable to their project. Soil composition perfect for heavy construction, natural drainage that would save millions in infrastructure costs, elevation that provided ideal sight lines for traffic management. All those years of calculating stress loads and foundation requirements suddenly became my secret weapon. My knowledge, which had seemed useless in the swamp, had become my superpower. The developer's lawyer verified my documents. My inheritance was clean, no liens, no complications. The land was officially, legally, completely mine. Within a few weeks, the deal was done. $25 million. The number seemed unreal, but the money was in my account. I opened my banking app and checked it 3 times. I stared at all those zeros and thought, Dad, you couldn't have imagined what treasure you left me. But money wasn't the only gift fate had in store. Because of my knowledge and strategic understanding of the project, the developer offered me a position as lead consulting engineer for the hub development. This was a direct invitation to return to my profession, but at a completely different level. This wasn't just a job, it was my calling. Instead of shuffling paperwork in some corporate tower, I'd be creating something monumental, something that would transform entire communities for generations. If your heart is beating faster right now and you can taste that victory, that euphoria of knowing justice exists, then you understand what I'm talking about. Hit that subscribe button, because this channel tells the truth about the American dream, about how it works when you believe in yourself and never give up. A few months later, I was standing where my old farmhouse used to be. Construction equipment hummed all around me, and the first massive structures of the future logistics hub were rising from the ground. I wasn't just a visitor to this site. I was part of this incredible project. That's when Mr. Smith approached me, looking like a man who'd aged 10 years in 10 months. His face was gaunt, his voice trembling. "Jake," he croaked, looking into eyes that had once meant nothing to him. "I was wondering, maybe you might have some work on this project for my son? And for me too? We could really use. You're obviously, well, you understand." I looked at this proud man who'd spent months flooding my garden and sabotaging my tractor, now begging me for help. It was like a scene from a movie I was directing myself. Never in my life had I felt so confident, so calm, so powerful. In that moment, I felt like a true winner. Their contempt had boomeranged back to them 100-fold. And you know what? This wasn't about revenge. This was about justice. I didn't say no outright, but I didn't rush to give them an answer either. I let them feel their complete dependence on my goodwill. "The project is big," I said calmly. "There'll be work for many people, but management makes those decisions. Send me your resumes and I'll pass them along." I gave them hope while making sure they understood exactly how dramatically the roles had reversed. Their faces were priceless. Shortly after, I got a message from Sarah. She'd obviously heard about my success through the small-town gossip network. She tried to reconnect, writing long letters about youthful mistakes and true love. How she'd always believed in me and never doubted my potential. I read them and deleted them. No anger, no regret. I understood that real value wasn't her love or some city condo, but my faith in myself, my father's legacy, and my own knowledge. I stood looking at the construction site, at the massive project growing on my land, and I smiled. I watched the Smiths in the distance and remembered Sarah, all the people who had once dismissed me. And I understood the American dream really works. It's not about how much money you have, but about what you can create from what others consider trash and how you use your mind. It was so overwhelming that I wanted to cry from pride. I still can't believe this happened to me. Things like this don't happen to regular people. But I did this myself, and I became part of something huge. I didn't just build a hub. I built my life, and it was the best project of my entire life. If you believe in justice and the power of your own dreams, write in the comments. The American dream is alive, and I'm proof. Or just, Jake, you're awesome. See you in the next story, where we'll prove once again that life is full of surprises.